Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. I want to call out Data Architecture Day, which is coming up on Saturday, May 16th. Our call for speakers has closed, and now at this point, we are finalizing the session list, and as soon as that's done, I'm going to post it, and that way everybody knows what'll go on. If all works out the way that I'm expecting, we're going to start at 9 a.m. Eastern and run all the way through 10 p.m. Eastern on the 16th. So I'm not going to be able to take my midday nap. We'll see how cranky I get by 10 o'clock. Probably very cranky. So with that, we have a new panelist directly to my right, which is my left on the camera. So, Tracy Baggiano, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing this evening?
Doing great.
So we actually have two extra panelists tonight. So we got two for the price of one. It's difficult to see the other one here.
Oh, we got Quake. I shouldn't have changed the camera angle.
Yeah, I know you can't see her anymore.
I'll change the camera angle back so you can see the cat.
So while Tracy's showing off the other panelist, down at the other end, manning the other quadrants, Mala Mahadevan, how are you?
I am well, thank you.
Excellent. And Tom Norman, enjoying another sunny day.
Enjoying the beautiful weather. Yes, I am.
And I've got my window closed because there's somebody mowing the lawn. Those are occupational hazards of shop talk. It's better than losing a finger. So Tracy is zooming out, and so that we're going to be able to see, maybe.
The cat.
Yeah.
There we go.
Sort of see the cat is black, so.
It's really difficult to see. There's urban camouflage cat.
If she moves around some, you'll see her. So I'll leave her there so you can watch her.
So
she's my assistant every day.
That's just Tracy Coffee. Does a lot of really interesting things.
Handy to have around, really.
Oh, absolutely. Don't let her take the keyboard.
She likes to type on the keyboard, and there's 3 of them around here attached to different things. So.
Yeah. So at least 2 of the keyboards will be fine. So we have a few questions tonight that I think are going to take up a fair amount of time. But the way the Shop Talk works is, if you have questions, lovely chat, drop them in. We'll prioritize them in the order in which I arbitrarily assign. We'd love to have your feedback, your thoughts, and your questions driving this show. In the event that we don't have any questions yet, fortunately, we have other questions that we can draw upon. So that way, we can keep the show going instead of awkwardly staring at you, waiting for you to ask us questions. It works better this way. So before the show began, we got a question from Chris Voss, who, you may remember, sent in a question a little while ago, and we gave him an answer regarding containerization. And Chris had a follow-up question, and that follow-up question is all about home lab setups. So he's interested not so much in how do I set up a home lab using Hyper-V or VMware or Docker containers or anything like that, but rather the equipment that you would use for a home lab. And it's because he's mostly looking at new computers, so getting an idea of what should I buy. So I want to open this up to the audience. We don't have David Klee in here, and David would basically say, oh, I have my own rack of servers in the basement. This is true. David has a rack of servers in the basement. Not all of us can afford the power for such things. But
yes,
for normal people, what do you do for lab-style computers?
Well, the first question that I would pose back would be, are you going to go mobile with that computer, or is it strictly going to stay at the house? So that's the very first question. And we all know with the product that we all use and love, SQL Server, if you can only have one piece of hardware to buy and you've got money to buy it, what piece of where would you add the hardware in any SQL Server? And I'll pose that to you guys and let you think where you might want to put that, where you'd put your money.
Interesting question.
Memory.
Memory.
Memory, absolutely memory. So when I went shopping for a new computer last year, that's it. That's the first thing I was looking for is, where's the maximum amount of memory I can get on my computer? And I actually found a laptop that's got 64 gigs of memory because I go out speaking. So.
Right.
Me too.
So I may be a bit of a contrarian on this one because the first thing that I would do is get as fast of disk as possible. Where if I have insanely fast disk, like if I've got just NVMe direct attached, I don't have to worry so much about memory.
If I got to do a demo in distributed availability groups, like I have 4 SQL servers, I need memory.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. If you have a bunch of SQL Server instances, yeah, you're going to need more RAM. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, my demos usually require 4 or 5 servers for just one presentation.
So if you're presenting and it's like Tracy said, you're going to have more than one SQL Server spun up, or in my case, if you're going to have more than one SQL or a Visual Studio spun up for SQL Server data tools or whatever, you're going to want memory. So.
True. You want at least a certain minimum. Like I would never roll out with a 4 gig laptop.
But then the second thing I would go after would be, yes, Kevin, would be the disk. I would try to stay away from spinning disk and come up with either SSD or the newer technology, Nvme.
Nvme. So we actually have a question on that. So this is a sub-question within our question. This one comes from Mark Gordon. This is also from a little while ago, which was, when it comes to storage, specifically for SQL Server, does Nvme offer an improvement over SSD?
I also had a question in that regard. I had 2 laptops with SSDs, and in both cases, the disk died. And especially after, this was especially after I took it around to travel and speak. So it may be specific to my situation, or is it really true that they die really soon?
What type of disks die really soon?
SSDs.
SSD? That may just be your bad luck.
Okay.
So Neil mentions that you need enterprise grade SSD. There is definitely a difference between consumer grade and enterprise grade in terms of how many times you can rewrite to a sector before it's effectively dead. And the prosumer in between is typically where I live. So like the Samsung Evo area, where it's not the cheap-end stuff, but it's also not the really expensive enterprise stuff, has worked fairly well for me. But SSD's typically better, especially if you're talking laptops, because the bane of the old laptop was, oh, never let that thing drop or shake or anything because you're going to ruin the disk. Like, the worst thing you could do to a hard drive is walk around with it, especially while it's spinning. And what do we do with laptops? We pick them up and walk around with them all the time.
Correct.
Yeah, Neil mentions buy the best one you can afford, replace every 18 to 24 months. Good advice. The Duke NY, by the way, had the correct answer for does NVMe have a difference compared to SSD, which is yes with an exclamation point. All capital letters, exclamation point. So I do want to talk about performance difference there, where I pulled up an article saying that seek times for data is about 10x with NVMe versus solid state. Way better than SATA SSD 3. So you get about 2,000 megabytes per second sustained read write, and SATA SSD 3 limits to about 600 megabytes per second. So at that extreme, generally you don't get exactly those numbers because of other hardware limitations, but there is a pretty good performance difference between those two, and definitely makes a difference when you're talking about SQL Server, where I need to be able to seek in very frequently, and typically I'm going to be writing a lot, especially to things like tempdb or log files. So the Duke mentions, tested this out, taking a table from SSD and put into in-memory OLTP versus a hard drive, and got way faster experience. Yep. That's why I say I think I am a contrarian on this a bit, but I would put more money into extremely good storage and cheap out on RAM if I had to pick between the two.
Hmm.
And I would agree with you, Kevin, except to the point of, to Tracy's point, how many SQL servers do you plan on running?
Right. This is the assumption that you have one.
Oh, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense.
If you're going to run more than one, especially up in the quadruple number or higher SQL Server instances all at the same time, then RAM's going to be just as important.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Fair enough.
That is true. Now I'm going to drop the link in chat here for the article that I was reading from very poorly.
And my laptop has both, so I'm a little spoiled. I got the 64 gig of RAM and the NVMe, so.
That's the way to
So
go.
are you talking about your work laptop, Tracy?
Huh?
Is it a work laptop you're saying?
No, I got a personal laptop. My work laptop's a baby laptop.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So it's only got like 16 gigs of memory in it. It's like, I can't use that for presentations. Too much security risk.
Mm.
I'm serious with DocuSign. It's too much of a security risk to even travel with my work computer.
You don't have to travel with it for being on call?
I'm not on call but once every 6 weeks, so no.
Oh, okay.
And we have a special machine coming that's only access to production only, and we got all these, I got so many two-factor authentication apps I can barely remember how to get in, so I don't think anybody else will be able to.
So did you get your laptop custom built like with Dell or HP, or is it
Well, I've got another one on the way right now.
a known name brand?
I don't know what it is. It's domainless and only access to production. So then when I
The one you were talking, your personal one.
my personal one's a Dell.
Mm-hmm.
I just spec'd it all the way out. It was a Dell XPS 15.
Yeah.
Almost 4 gigs of RAM, and I got the drives in it.
All right, that's what I thought. Yeah.
I just paid a lot of money, so.
Sure.
Yes, I would agree with you. And if you're getting a high class machine, you're definitely going to pay a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
So,
but I'm going to be probably presenting with it probably for the next 5 years at least. So I think it was worth it. At least 5 years.
Goodbye, co-presenter. It was nice seeing you. Okay, so
I can present. I did it this weekend without one SQL Server even running. I did good.
So that answers, I think, the NVMe versus SSD discussion. That you definitely get an advantage from NVMe as long as your servers can support it. I would certainly try to push for that. I love direct attached. You may have to deal with it as a SAN, and at that point you're starting to talk about things like all-flash arrays, like the pure storage devices where, hey, all-flash memory. I'm blanking because now I'm like, I shouldn't have said all-flash memory. It's all-flash arrays, but that's going to get you a lot closer to the ideal of maximized disk. So back to devices, Neil mentions having a couple of custom desktops, gamer types of rigs, and a gamer style laptop. That these tend to be really good for this style of work, and I do agree. Actually, I have a link that I want to drop in, and I want to actually share my screen for a hot second and talk about logical increments. So Logical Increments is a website that I do enjoy. I have used it in the past for building out my own desktop. Here we go. I'm going to go full screen on this so that way we can all see the glory of what's going on here. So the quick idea is that you basically have a tier of how much money you're willing to pay for a server, or for a desktop computer, and they'll give you recommendations on what type of equipment would fit that tier. So like if I'm willing to spend maybe $1,500, then I can come into here, and here are different here's the video card that you want to get, here's the CPU that you want to get. Interestingly, so many of these, AMD is just dominating, especially when you start talking about the higher end things. Like here's an i9, but all the rest of this is Ryzen. And as an AMD fanboy, going back a long way, my heart is just, it's just full of love at this. But the gist of it is, this is actually intended mostly for gamers, but following up from Neil, let me take myself out of screen sharing now so that you can go back to seeing me. And following up from Neil, the gaming PCs work really well for a couple of reasons. One is that if you are at all in data science, you are going to want as good of a video card as possible, because that GPU is going to let you do things like working with CUDA. So I can use TensorFlow with a GPU. I can use other libraries that are GPU enabled and take advantage of the serious power that can offer me. Now, if you're just talking about SQL Server and you're just talking about, I have a set of Windows servers that I'm trying stuff out with, that may not be quite as important. And instead, you'll want a lot of cores, you'll want a lot of RAM, you'll want a lot of fast disk, particularly Nvme, because you can get, here's a 1 terabyte Nvme drive, Intel, for $125. Get a couple of those, or go up a tier or two and get some of the closer to enterprise grade M2 style disk or NVMe, and you will notice the difference. Let me check out chat here.
Of course, you gotta get the motherboard that's going to support that now.
Yes, you do have to get a motherboard that supports it. Also, one of the things I like about this particular site is that they'll show you, all right, well, here are a few different motherboards based on your preferences, including how blinky you want the lights to be. Because the Big Mike in Austin mentions, you can't forget the RGB lighting. That is true. You definitely need to have it blinking.
That's important.
The brighter, the better.
Very important.
So can you talk about the implications all of this has on machine learning services inside of SQL Server? Like with everything else. So, anybody else want to take that aside from me?
It's all yours.
It's all yours, Kevin.
All right,
all
so
yours.
it's all me. That's fine. So, as far as machine learning services goes, you can take advantage of GPU in certain situations. Basically, like I can set up TensorFlow with GPU support. It is a friggin' nightmare, but I have gotten TensorFlow and Keras working with SQL Server 2019. It was actually easier with 2017. Then they changed the security model. At that point, you're still talking about basically the same stuff that you're interested in for a regular SQL Server. Give me all of the RAM. In this case, I absolutely want a whole lot of RAM, because R and Python are both memory-hungry languages, and they want to soak up as much RAM as possible. In fact, I have something that I'm going to come back to later on about ML services and memory allocation errors. So I'll put a pin in that part. But the other side is that, yeah, you also want CPU, because especially if you don't have libraries that are GPU enabled, you are going to have a lot of fun waiting for things to finish processing. And in those cases, disk matters a lot less because you load all that up into memory one time, and then you're working in a data frame in R, or you're working in a like pandas data table, and that stuff doesn't write to disk again. So their memory, more CPU cores, faster CPU cores tend to weigh heavier than really awesome disk. The Duke mentioned having the same nightmares. Yeah, I'm going to have a blog post about how to install it. I don't know if the ML services team will look at that and say, yeah, that seems like a reasonable way of doing it, or if they'll look at it and say, oh my gosh, is he doing this weird stuff again? Because they've seen some of the stuff that I've done. Like, why would you do that? Why don't you do this other thing? The other thing didn't work. So I think that hit on the desktop side of things. So check out Logical Increments, completely free site, very friendly for people who are looking at building machines. I used it myself when I built my desktop, and they have sample builds, but mostly, like I said, it's mostly for gamers. That said, the same type of equipment works really well for business usage when you're talking SQL Server, which makes it really good because now it's a business expense that you write off for tax purposes.
If you've got a consultant business on the side.
Yes, if you have a business, don't do that unless you actually have a business and you're using it for business. Please don't audit me, IRS. So John Fan asked, which languages are so memory consuming? So technically all languages are memory consuming, but R and Python have a history of being very memory greedy, where R, for example, wants to load all of the data in memory at once. There are modifications. There are libraries that will allow you to page in and out to disk, but the default, the norm is I am going to soak up everything. I'm going to take all of those bits, pull it up into memory at once. I've got my data frame, and then I'm going to work on this. Well, in the process of working on it, some of those libraries are not necessarily incredibly memory efficient there. Like they may make copies of elements as they're working through them, so you may end up with a pretty large amount of memory bloat. Now, it's not a memory leak. You get the memory back when the processing's done, but you will want to have a lot of RAM available that you can dedicate to R and Python, which may make it difficult to fit in where you've got a busy transactional system that I want the RAM to, keep that buffer pool filled up, to keep as many pages as I can available for end users. So it is a point of contention. It's probably the biggest point of contention between ML services and transactional processing systems.
The other thing to denote is if you're going to go the mobile, the laptop route, is you do get to a point you're capped in how much memory you can purchase. Have you seen anything higher than 64, Tracy? Or is 64 about the max you can get on a laptop right now?
That was the best I could find at the time. I'm sure there probably is more somewhere, but it was very difficult to find one that you could.
Yeah, when I was purchasing mine last year, 64 was about as good as I could get.
Yeah, for laptops, the extreme end ones, I remember going up to 128, but there we're talking, it's a laptop in name only. It is mostly capped by motherboard, as Neil mentions. Also, Neil points out a website called Overclockers, which is a UK site that's mostly around building gaming systems and giving you advice on what types of components work well together. So I'm going to have a link to that. There we go.
The real question is, how much money do you have to spend and are willing to spend on the laptop or computer, that you're going to buy, because it's going to cost you a really nice computer is going to cost you several $1,000s.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, when you also factor in that really fancy 4K screen that you absolutely need.
Yeah, it's going to cost you some money.
True. So let me go through, and we will have another question. I want to make sure that I hit all of the points. Big Mike in Austin is also happy that AMD is on top. So that's we are CPU compadres. Let's see. We talked about languages being memory inefficient, or maybe not even inefficient, but just they like to soak up memory based on their nature. The Duke mentions if you use Apache Arrow, Arrow tends to be a bit more memory efficient. And the answer is typically yes, as long as you get it to work correctly. And also using NumPy is typically a little bit better than Pandas. Also, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Pandas is the first thing that I thought of in terms of the Python side.
What about, Kevin? What about Windows and Linux now? How you think that's going to affect computer specs?
Interesting question, Tom.
So Windows versus Linux, or excuse me, Windows subsystem for Linux.
I'm not sure I could.
Yeah, Windows subsystem for Linux, to where you're going to now be able to run Linux and Windows, and you can put a container. If you had a Windows system, you could get the subsystem to run containers and stuff for you.
I don't know that necessarily changes anything in terms of hardware. I mean, I don't think it changes the advice that basically you go for within your budget, typically the newest generation of processor that gives you the most performance per core, or most performance overall. And I don't think that saying that we're gonna run native containers really affects that, except to say perhaps I want more cores than fewer cores, even if they're not necessarily as fast per core, because then I can still have more current things running. Containers will slow you down. This is true. But it'll slow you down, but not necessarily a huge amount. Like if you're running at the edge of your system, okay, that's fair. Not having any sort of virtualization is faster than virtualizing. But that's if you're at that efficient frontier. If you're well within the efficient frontier, like I can look at my machine. I don't know that I've ever hit 100% CPU on this machine. I've tried. Trust me, dear viewer, I've tried. And it is really difficult to sustain 100%.
The one thing that I really wish Microsoft would do, they give you, Azure credits as a developer, and they give you just enough to kind of tease you and stuff. But it would really be nice from a developer speaker kind of context if they would turn around and have a different tier for that particular group to be able to allow you, instead of having to buy these massive laptops, now all of a sudden you can buy these more compact, cheap laptops and just connect to the cloud to do everything.
Yeah. That's that definitely is.
Until you get to Charlotte and the ports are blocked. You have to
True.
on your phone.
Yeah, if you're speaking, it's almost you need to be able to be totally self-contained. Which
Right.
which I know Chris Voss speaks, so you really want to be as much
So what kind of
self-contained as
issues
possible.
have you had with Azure and speaking? Is it that it gets blocked at some places?
Yeah, they have stuff blocked going out of the school.
Oh,
Yeah,
Login
and then
slow
I've walked in.
internet.
I've walked into SQL Saturdays to where the connectivity was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had to run the presentation off my phone, like Tracy was saying.
Yeah, that I can totally see.
So
I was wondering if there was more to it than that, but that makes total sense.
Yep.
Yeah. So
If you're
Iconpro
gonna
is
do-
mentioning that if you're already running a VM, adding containers on the VM is not going to be faster. No, it won't. But Tom's mentioning Windows Subsystem for Linux 2, where it's native containers without VMs. So that will make a difference there. There will still be a performance penalty because there's a penalty for code running, but it's not as big as VM plus container. It's still there. Like if it is a non-zero amount, but it's less than it was for people running normal Docker for desktop.
Well, it's going to be interesting that, now you've got the ability to run Hyper-V, or VirtualBox or VMware or whatever, or container in the subsystem. It's like, who's going to use up more power? And I would think that the Hyper-V type of system, the full-blown VM system, is going to use more power than your virtual machines or your containers would.
I think that'd be an empirical test.
Yeah.
Okay, so from John Fan in the chat here, can you recommend a good book to learn SQL? And while you guys give your recommendations, I'm going to pull out my recommendation.
Straight T-SQL?
Yes.
Yeah, which part?
If you're going to learn...
T-SQL or SQL Server or...
T-SQL.
If you're going to learn T-SQL, I think one of the best books that I read was the 762 querying language. To take that test, but it came up with a lot of stuff. I thought it covered a lot.
Okay. Any other recommendations?
There is a book. There is a series by Rick Moreland, who comes on the talk show that Kevin does, SQL Data Partners. Sometimes he has a Joes to Pro series on T-SQL, which is also pretty good.
I don't have a beginner book, so that would be a good one, right? Yeah, I didn't know he did a fundamentals book.
Yep.
Yeah, he did.
Who's that, Kevin?
Itzik Ben-Gan has T-SQL fundamentals. When there are new people who need to learn T-SQL, this is the book that I buy them. I actually bought this for one of my employees, and then she went and bought the ebook version and gave this copy back to me so that I can give it to the next person. But this is an amazing book. Definitely, if you want a single book on getting into T-SQL, Itzik is, for my money, the best person at writing T-SQL on the planet, and is a really good trainer and presenter and teacher. He has some in-depth books on other topics. Like there's an entire book on window functions where it was written 8 years ago, and you'll still learn things that, like, I never knew that this was possible. Oh yeah, it was in 2012.
I've actually gone to one of his pre-cons probably about 6-7 years ago, and I actually signed up for his pre-con this year because you just learn so much from him, and stuff. And he takes that mathematical mind and applies it to it, and it's like.
There's also a 2005 T-SQL book by Hugo Cornelis and Adam Mechanic that I still have. It's a bit dated, but it's still very good.
Are you talking the expert SQL Server development?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so...
It's an old book, yeah.
The reason I would not recommend this one for somebody learning T-SQL is this book, they assume that you know T-SQL really well, and they will teach you things.
That's true. That I agree, yeah.
Go through Itzik's book, spend a couple of years learning this, and then pick up this book, which is 15 years old, mind you, and it is still an incredible book to have.
Yes.
Because they basically assume that you already know T-SQL really well, and want to see amazing things. That's kind of the assumption that they have. It's not that they're going to teach you from the beginning to this point. It's like, I assume that you know most of this stuff already, and now I'm going to show you an application that is powerful. So an example of that, we were talking pre-stream about hierarchies, because last time around, last week Tom mentioned using hierarchy ID, and this week Tom mentioned having some performance issues with hierarchy ID. And inside this expert book, there is an entire chapter on 3 different styles of writing hierarchies in SQL Server. And it's not a beginner book at all. But if you understand the language, you will get a huge amount out of it. No newer edition? No, there has been no newer edition. This is the only version that they wrote.
You know what's interesting about SQL hierarchy? You know, you're like going, okay, they put this ID within the database and, you know, marketed it and all that kind of stuff. And you're like going, yes, that's going to solve all my problems with SQL hierarchy. And it's like, oh my word, you know.
It doesn't even support multiple parents, children kind of relationship.
No, it doesn't. No.
It doesn't. And everything they do with that is half done. They did the same thing with graph model too, is that it had so much potential and they just, now it's not worth much.
Well, that's the thing with, you know, you even look at encryption. Encryption works really well, but there's so many limitations to it that if you can't accept the limitations to run with it, then you're like, okay, what good is it?
Any new books for advanced SQL? I'm sure that there are.
ITSIG is always new.
Yeah.
Just go pick up a Isaac Bengan book. You got it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or if you can get to Summit, you know, go sit through an all-day class with Isaac Bengan. It's definitely well worth the time. He's not going to blow your mind so much that you're not going to understand by the end of the day. You'll understand, but like Kevin said, he's a great teacher. But boy, he's got a lot of good examples.
He had an online advanced SQL training too. It wasn't cheap. Let me see if it's still around.
He did at one point. Now, I would also say that a lot of advanced concepts are more concepts than syntax. The beginner stuff teaches you syntax. It teaches you a lot of the ideas that get you there. And those will change frequently as versions change. But as you get to more advanced ideas, although the implementations can change a bit between versions, I think that changes less frequently.
That's
so
true.
2012 was probably the last version where a huge number of T-SQL specific solutions radically altered. And I'm calling out T-SQL specifically, so saying, you know, I can run this thing in R or in Python and bring it back, or in Java and bring it back. I'm gonna disallow that on practical purposes, and just say that within the T-SQL language itself, without talking any extensions, any extended language supports, there have been additions. There have been nice additions, but I think those additions are smaller in scope and don't necessarily change the advanced level stuff. So
ITSIG's T-SQL Fundamentals is available on demand from his website. Let me post the link here, Kevin. Maybe you can share it with whoever wants it.
So
I think it's priced reasonably too. It's $398 or something. It might be worth it. So it's right there.
All right, so I'll post that in chat, in other chat for everybody, instead of secret chat. Here we go. So that's ITSIG's training.
My saying is when I've seen SQL written and stuff is like some of the best performing, I think, is keep it simple, stupid. You know, it's like don't try to get overly complex, because the more complex you get, you know, you try to keep it to a low set of lines written and keep it simple, and it's going to perform better than the massive crazy stuff that you can write.
Right. That is true.
Generally true. So Ray mentions that if it's about ideas, the Selco books are also good. We had a discussion about that before the stream as well. Yeah, Joe writes, if you're not interested in learning for a particular flavor of SQL, Joe's books will give you a lot on ideas. And speaking of trees, there's a whole book that he has on trees and hierarchies that I have behind me as well. That is a really good book.
Yes.
He's a good writer. He explains things quite well, and he will also not write about any particular platform. So you would have to translate and be like, oh, this idea that you told me about, which looks really good, but exactly 0 implementations of it exist, so I need to find a way to do it in real life. The Duke mentions getting some NoSQL knowledge if you're working with Spark SQL or HiveQL, looking at Impala. They don't all follow the ANSI SQL standards. They do have their own differences. This is also true if you're not living specifically within the SQL Server world. All of the different varieties, all the different flavors of SQL implement certain parts of the ANSI standard. They ignore others, and they add additional things. Like, actually, one of the things I really like in Spark SQL is explode, where I can easily turn an array, or turn a comma-separated list into an array, and then unpivot that array using just a couple of functional commands. It's kind of easier to do that than in ANSI SQL.
So Spark doesn't exactly run off of relational data, does it, Kevin? So you have to use it. Yeah.
So Spark is not a relational platform, but Spark SQL is still SQL. So it is still a structured query language. It's just a non-relational data storage underneath. Because SQL doesn't have to be relational. It's just that relational is the best. So with that, we're going to move on to our next question. This one, how about polybase books? Who would write a polybase book? Who seriously would write a book on polybase? I have 5 copies of it behind me. I don't know if I could give them away. Yeah, actually, if you do want to learn about polybase, there's exactly one person who has ever written a book on it, and probably only will be one person who will ever write a book on it.
Might write version 2.
What was that, Tracy?
You might write version 2, and then there'll be 2 books.
I might write version 2. Probably not. I don't think I would write version 2. Not unless there were drastic changes to polybase. I think I did enough with it. It's covered. It's out there. There's a lot more to do beyond what I wrote, but right now I'm like, okay, I've written enough on it. Joe Selko did help write several of the ANSI standards. You are right, Big Mike and Austin. He has been a big part of the ANSI board, and as a result, very much prefers to write an ANSI SQL as opposed to any particular implementation. Has anybody seen SAP SQL Server Schema, the B1 version? I have not.
I would be
Yes,
scared.
SAP even have a schema. I didn't realize that. No, just
I'd be scared based on my experience.
So 0 for 4, Icon Pro, sorry. Let's see. Lots of 5-letter names. Ugh. I always hated that. Like, I hate the DB2 8-character limitation. Oracle's 32 characters. SQL Server's 128, and I have gotten to 100 plus before, but just let me name the thing as long as I want it to be. With IntelliSense, I don't think it matters as much that I have a long name. Now I'm on a working on another ERP schema, and they use 4-letter names. I got a lot of 4-letter words for that schema. So Fox Pro. Oh boy, yeah, Fox Pro.
That's where the 4 letters came from.
Hey, watch out now. I love Fox Pro. I was a Fox Pro programmer.
I don't care. That's where the 4 letters
So
came
do I. I started
Fox
with
Pro
databases with
was
Fox
in
Pro.
its daytime.
I didn't complain about the
I
language.
know it was.
4 characters.
Yeah, it was all about the 4 characters. So, from Gabriel, is there really a need to support and maintain right join?
No.
No.
Doesn't matter, but no.
Okay, so we have 3 no's. I feel like I need to be the contrarian because that is my job title. But I still no. There, right join, I have used right join a couple of times to the point where it was clearer than the alternative. A couple of times. That should give you an idea of how frequently we want to use right joins. Because you can write any right join as an equivalent left join. Neil mentions it's never right to use right. And that is a nice saying, and I will agree with it roughly 99.999% of the time. There have actually been a couple of cases in my career where I've written a thing and I've said the right join version actually is easier to read. And then I'll have a comment that actually says that. Look, I left it as a right join on purpose because this is a lot easier to read than the alternative. It's extremely rare. Rare to the point where I am fully sympathetic in saying that if I see a right outer join, you'd better explain to me why it needs to be a right outer join. And that's what I thought of what doesn't make the cut. So yeah, right outer join. Generally, no, don't use it. Don't use it. Rare cases can make sense.
What kind of rare cases?
I mean, I don't even remember the exact case, but it was a rather complicated combination of joins where at the end basically it was this really complex set of inner and outer joins, and then a right outer join that was, in case all of this stuff fails, just come back to this. Internally it gets broken down to the same type of join anyways. This is true. I mean, like I said, you can syntactically rewrite any right outer join as a left outer join. It's all about human readability. And almost all the time, that human readability makes a lot more sense with left outer join because we're reading top to bottom. So I assume this thing, the first thing you show me is the most important thing, and the things it connects to are relatively less important things, or that this is the thing I'm driving from and these are the things I'm connecting to. And a right outer join just throws a monkey wrench into the works because now it becomes relatively more important than all of the things preceding it. So it's not something I would recommend that anybody actively write. So Solomon is talking about, okay, Solomon mentions 4-letter names. That's what you use for aliases. We have aliases to simplify. Full names are much more readable, hence more maintainable. Yes, longer names, with it obviously to a limit. Padding a name for the sake of having a longer column name is stupid, but having a clear name is for the human. I mean, it's not for the system. The compiler doesn't care. The interpreter doesn't care.
Very well said, yes.
Yeah, it's for that human who has to maintain it later. And if you have a table where it's like AB12, AB17, SE16, or Tracy knows the Fox Pro example, I know the same Fox Pro example, where it is literally hundreds of tables that are like AA00, AA01, AA02. how am I as a human going to understand, oh, well, AA02 joins to AA26. By the way, there are no keys.
Because you got D100 that contains all the columns and tells you what they all mean, and you go and you look them all up every time you do something, and no, you don't.
Yeah, exactly. You have to hope that all the column names actually mean what they say, but then the column names are also 4-character cryptic codes. So just a train wreck.
Because some of them are in there.
You shoot people that do that.
So, some people just need shooting is a justifiable defense in certain states.
Or at least take them out and cane them.
But yeah, that's obviously the extreme end, and Tracy and I have both dealt with this particular situation, so it's real. It's the extreme end.
I know. I've heard it. Yeah.
But it is, I think, even if you don't go to that extreme, you write these column names, you design these table names for people later on to manage and maintain. So yeah, I tend to err on the side of being a little bit lengthier, a little bit more verbose, but hopefully clearer to somebody maintaining it later.
Well, and that's the way I look at it too, is, you're going to hire in other DBAs, you're going to have people maintain it. And to me, I would rather have a name that makes sense, so that when you look at it, you're not guessing what is there.
Yeah, and make it consistent. The one thing that drives me crazy is the same piece of data called by 20 different names across the schema.
I even have
just so maddening.
Yeah, I have very verbose foreign key names, and because if I have a foreign key violation, I don't have to necessarily go look up and see what's connecting to what to see what it is. I can look at that name and I know exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is designed for humans.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about text strings. I mean, you could argue that back when Oracle and DB2 put these caps on how long a column name could be, that there was a performance difference between a really long column name and a short column name. And so, yeah, the smart DBA only has 2-character column names. Those days are so far past us at this point that it's actively harmful.
Yes.
Because you will spend, basically, if you're thinking about this from a cost perspective, the cost of a bug getting into production because a developer didn't understand it, pretty big. The time spent for developers just trying to understand what is going on is more than the savings that you get from any performance benefit out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But like I said, there's, you're looking for the Aristotelian mean of this, where I want to find the table name or the column name which is explanatory without being unnecessarily verbose. Be just as verbose as you need to be, but no more. And admittedly, I tend to err on the side of being more verbose.
Fair enough.
So, as I'm going through, there's a bit of back and forth in chat about this same thing, about whether or not long column names are good idea, bad idea. The Duke mentions data scientists love long column names, really obscure names. This is true. We do love those things.
No, they're two different things. Long column names and really obscure names are two different things. I don't mind long names. Obscure names are... Ooh.
So, yeah, I'll call them jargony names, where, it's very clear if you are familiar with the jargon. If you're not familiar with the jargon, then yeah, it's obscure. It doesn't seem to make much sense. But if you do understand the jargon of it, then oh, this makes perfect sense. Well, this is this type of measure. Like I may have a column named MAPE, MAPE, and if you aren't familiar with the concept of MAPE or RMSLE, if you're not familiar with that, then it may actually make sense for me to write out root mean square log error, and I may do that in certain cases because it is clearer to the next person. If I know that there are non-statisticians involved in this, I'm going to type root mean square log error because, yes, it's longer and I could just say RMSLE, but this makes it easier for somebody to Google.
In fact, when I was new to my present job, during my first few days, I kept being told to go look up this PID, and I would go to SQL Server and I would run SP-who2 and see which PID does she want. Okay, because in my mind, PID is a SQL Server process ID. I had no idea that that is company jargon. It took me quite a...
So that there is company jargon. You'll have, every company is going to have that where you come in and like, I don't understand what this thing is. And, oh, well, it's easy. This is a subset of this, which is a subset of this. Like, oh, so this is this. No, it's totally different. You see, you have this other thing where, except in this case, where it's like this. So it's, that is, once saw a data scientist use the column X_T, asking what in the world is X_T. Okay, yeah, that one, that probably shouldn't be a column, unless the person can really explain what X_T means, and convincingly do so. And you have a quiz on it the next week. Okay, what is X_T? And if everybody gets it right, all right, keep the column name. Otherwise, nah. Most likely what happened was that was the output of a package, and it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to save the table, and then wrote out that table, including X_T, which was probably an end prediction or something. Worked at a place that had a table, oh boy, Solomon worked at a place that had a table named Stuff, with 2 columns, X and something else just as helpful. So like X and
that is funny.
I've worked at a place that had a similar table.
I've seen tables with people's names like, Brian's table or Mala's table or somebody's table, like that. Just that person exporting some data or doing something ad hoc with it and named it after them.
Yeah, well, back in the pre-2005 days, where schemas were basically user security, you would have that. You would have the Brian schema, the Mala schema, and this is Mala's tables. That's Mala dot whatever.
Yeah.
And then 2005 comes around and says, no, schemas are more of a logical construct instead of a user security level. And I think that made things better.
It did, I think so.
Mala also worked at a place with a table in prod named John_temp. I love that it's _temp. It's like, this is a temporary table. Oh, heaven, please don't drop that table because everything runs off of it. I imagine that was a load-bearing table right there because it had temp in the name.
I once worked at a company where the whole application ran out of temporary tables.
The whole app ran out of temp tables.
Yes.
That's a way of doing things.
It did not have a user database. It did not have any tables in master or MSDB or anything. And it had data
all
somewhere.
TempDB.
It's all TempDB.
I mean,
so how did they persist the data, Tracy? Where did they persist it?
I don't know how they persisted it. Because this was a 6.5 server, and this was like 2005 days, and I'm assuming that they read some data off disk somehow and persisted it somehow or the other there. No one ever could explain it to me, but it literally ran the data in temp tables.
They just never rebooted the server. Like, oh, we rebooted the server once and it just crashed our system. Everything was broken.
It actually died. The server 6 died one time, so we only had 7, so we had no failover for it. for the last 2 or 3 years I was there. I just pretended like it didn't exist because I didn't have CDs to install 6.5, so I didn't put it in the inventory list.
Solomon mentions the John temp table was sadly the least of the problems. That's how it goes. So John Fan, as far as naming it something like John Temp as capital letters, it's not the naming scheme that gets us. It's the fact that you're naming a permanent table as temp, and that it's still there. Like, if it's a real temp table, you can make it a temporary table, # table. You may make it. There are times when you need a table to be a permanent table that is temporary in nature, where it's got to be in a proper schema in this database, but we're going to load data in there temporarily, and then we're going to drop the table later. Okay. I mean, name it what you want. Generally, I'll put something like delete me after some date, because that indicates this is actually a table that I've committed that if it's past that date, go ahead and drop that table. But naming tables with temp is pretty dangerous, because those temp tables end up becoming permanent. And when they're permanent and they're still named temp, it just confuses everybody. So with that,
CPAs want to go in and delete them.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody's going to go in and delete it, and people are going to get angry about it. Like, why did you delete the table? It said temp.
It said temp. Or we're going to send out an email going, what's this for? Can we get rid of it?
Right.
That's
like, yeah. Can we delete this
most
thing?
places start naming file groups too. My file group 1.
Well, that was just somebody copying and pasting SQL from a website. All right. So with that, we are going to wrap up for this evening. Thanks for the conversation, everybody. It was a great time. Glad to see you here, Tracy and Mala. We were also glad to see Tom until the internet demons stole him away. And for everybody in chat, one last time, Data Architecture Day. So Neil Handley's in chat. Neil will be one of our speakers for Data Architecture Day. We are looking forward to that. Saturday, May 16th, we're going to put out all of the session information very soon, probably tomorrow, and then you'll know exactly who is speaking when. Solomon is in chat. Solomon is another speaker for Data Architecture Day. So we've got, at the very least, 2 of them in here. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you again next week. Have a great one.
Bye. Good night.